Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. You have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. It is Tuesday, it is 4 p.m. ET, and I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 15 going on 16 novels of suspense. My current book is One Wrong Word, which is out right now in paperback, already in paperback. And my new book, All This Could Be Yours, comes out this time next year, and we will hear about that when the time comes. But today we are here to focus very carefully on The Mesmerist by the fabulous Caroline Woods, which is out just now to absolute raves. Welcome, welcome, welcome to you all. Shannon Hansen is here, and Catherine is here, and Katie is here. And this is absolutely a terrific, atmospheric, evocative book, thought-provoking in every way, and impeccably researched, you all. I cannot wait for you to hear about this, and I cannot wait for you to read this. The Mesmerist is just out by Caroline Woods from Doubleday just a week ago, and she has been getting raves and adulation ever since then. Caroline, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here with you.
So how has it been the week after Pub Week? Is it exciting and fabulous and fast paced? Is it, that Pub Week is really always high stress?
It is. I mean, it's been high energy. I've been doing events, book signings, talks. I have been really excited now that the public can read the book. It's not just people reading galleys, it's actual consumers, and they're talking about it on Goodreads. And I am one of those people who reads their reviews, and I've just really enjoyed listening to what people have to say about the book.
Well, it's universally beloved. I mean, look at this gorgeous cover. When you saw this cover, what did you think?
Oh my gosh, I was so happy and so excited. It's always a little nerve-wracking because this book is, your baby, your project, and then you hand it over and someone else is going to design its face. So I didn't know what to expect. And when I saw this, I was like, this is a piece of art. This is fantastic. I feel like the fonts really convey the time period. And then the little figure of the woman, she could be any of the three women at the heart of this novel. The colors I love. I adore this cover. I love it.
And when you all read the book, you will see that the color is meaningful, and that is that's very, very special. I never heard of anyone say you write the book and then someone else is going to design its face. Yeah. That's really powerful, isn't it? Because that is the first thing that people see when they see the book.
It is, and I think that the cover affects my mood as I'm reading a book. I'm absorbing the cover as a part of the experience. So, it is very important.
I love that. And it does. I always look back at the cover as I'm reading, because often in a good cover, the elements of the cover come back to mean even more as you're reading the book. And we will hear more about that in a minute as I see all of you arriving. This is great. Diane Dick says, purple is my favorite color. You will think about something about that when you read this. Diane, Susie Baldwin is here. Katie is here. That is so marvelous. Publishers Weekly says, a starred review. Readers will be up all night. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that review later on in the interview. But let me tell you quickly, if you are new to A Mighty Blaze, welcome, welcome, welcome. You have picked an absolutely marvelous day to join us here as we talk with Caroline Woods about her brand new The Mesmerist. If you have been to A Mighty Blaze before, we're so happy about that. We love to see you Blazers here come every Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET. If you're new, welcome, as I said. A Mighty Blaze was started now nigh on to 5 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic by the fabulous powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us all reading and chatting and learning about new books and talking with our favorite authors and potentially meeting some new favorite authors and sort of just keeping the book community together. And we have persevered, a couple dozen volunteers to keep you knowing about the book world 24/7. And we are so pleased that you are part of the community. Speaking of part of the community, let me tell you a tiny bit about our guest today, Caroline Woods, and then we'll have some questions for her. And then we want you to ask questions too. So make sure you put those questions and comments in the chat, and Margaret in the back room will shepherd those over to us later in the show. And then we will give away a copy of The Mesmerist. Well, I'm not giving it away. I'm keeping this. I'm keeping it. But Caroline and her fabulous publisher, Doubleday, will give away a copy of The Mesmerist to one lucky reader. And the rest of you, you know what to do. Run, 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 click, 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 and get your copy of The Mesmerist. But not right now. Let me tell you, wait till the show is over, okay? Wait till the show is over. And I will tell you now about Caroline Woods. Caroline holds an MFA in fiction from Boston University. She is the author of the novels The Lunar Housewife and Fräulein M., and she has taught fiction writing at Loyola University Chicago, Boston University, and the Boston Conservatory. Raised in Delaware, she now lives near Chicago with her husband and 2 daughters. That's where I was born, in Chicago, and I live in Boston, so our lives have intersected some way that we didn't even know.
Oh, look at that. I know. I love both places so much. I love Boston.
They're similar, aren't they? They're sharp and crisp and smart and glittering when they're glittering and scary when they're scary.
Cold when they're cold.
Yes, yes,
a lot of writers in both places.
Yeah, exactly so. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Mesmerist. So many great reviews. And we won't do any spoilers today, and yet we'll walk on tiptoe you all through this book. But first, just tell us what the book is about.
So the book is set in a home for unwed mothers in 1894 in Minneapolis. And it involves 3 different women, one who arrives at this home unexpectedly. She doesn't speak. She won't say where she came from or what happened to her because she has bruises. And quickly the rumor spreads in this home that she is a mesmerist. And meanwhile, there seems to be a killer on the run or on the lam in Minneapolis, and women are disappearing. And the rumor starts to spread that this woman who shows up at the home is some way related to the killer. So all 3 of the point of view characters, who are all women involved with the Bethany home, are going to have to come together and sort of solve these murders and solve the mystery of who this young woman is.
And sort of knit up the raveled sleeves of their own lives. I mean, it's such a story about female empowerment and how women take care of each other and how terrifying the world can be, sort of no matter what time you live. Shannon Hansen says, sounds so good. And Renee says, sounds incredible. Yes, yes, absolutely, indeed. The setting is glorious. The characters are glorious. It's absolutely terrifying. And you make them be so relatable. Where did the first glimmer of an idea for this book come from?
I wanted to look into Gilded Age stories that weren't set in New York because we know, I think other authors like Renee Rosen have done such a good job of telling us about like the Astors and the Vanderbilts. But I was drawn to the Gilded Age and I decided to look here in the Midwest. And right away, I found stories of women who were progressive, like society women who were champions of progressive causes, like Jane Addams in Chicago was running Hull House to help like immigrant and working class women raise their children. And that led me very quickly to the Bethany home in Minneapolis, which was a real home. It was run by Quaker and Presbyterian ladies in Minneapolis, and it started in the 1870s. And the thing that struck me about it was that they were kind and treated unwed mothers with respect and dignity. Like it was part of the mission to treat these people with dignity and to tell them that they were worthy of a second chance. And that seemed really remarkable to me for a home for unwed mothers. I mean, we know of stories of homes like that 100 years later not treating the women that way. So I had my setting, but then my editor and I talked about it and we said, well, you can't just write a novel about women supporting other women. Like there has to be conflict. So just digging into the research, it seemed like it was ripe for conflict because so many of the women who came into this home had come under tough circumstances. Yeah. But there was also a very famous crime that happened in Minnesota, in Minneapolis in 1894. And it wasn't as hard as I thought after reading about that crime to tie that murder to the women of the Bethany home.
And we're not going to give anything away, I promise you all, but just as a writer, and you're deep in research, you kind of know what you're looking for in a nebulous way, but not in a specific way. And when you find the thing, the sort of linchpin key that's going to allow you to write about the women of Bethany, the Bethany home. How did that feel? Do you remember that moment when you thought, oh my golly?
Oh yeah. So I can say this, the criminal, the murderer, was thought to be a mesmerist. So he committed this crime, and then there were rumors that flew all over Minneapolis, calling him the Svengali of Minneapolis. And people were saying he's going to slip out of jail. He's going to hypnotize the guards to let him go free. He's going to slip right out of the noose. And he also, the piece that I found in my research, he hired a woman who was some kind of trance medium, mesmerist, something like that, to help convince his victim to trust him. So when I read that detail, and I had already planned that I would have a woman mesmerist who is kind of his counterpart in this novel, I went, oh my God, like this is the piece. Like this person really, I don't know who she was, but she really existed. He hired a medium to, as part of his elaborate scheme. And that was like a gives you chills kind of moment, because it was almost like the research was confirming the plot that already existed.
The research was confirming the plot that already existed. Isn't that great? It's like the muse saying, yes, Caroline, you have got this. You are right. Talk a little bit about mesmerism and what that was, or what that is, and why and how it was so popular at the time.
Mesmerism was invented 100 years earlier by a German doctor, I think Franz Mesmer. He saw it as a system of healing. So our bodies had this invisible fluid flowing in them, and people who were powerful magnetists or mesmerists could manipulate the fluid and cure your headaches, or help you sleep at night. And it was kind of like chi, we would talk about life force, or it was called animal magnetism, but also mesmerism. It kind of lost popularity for a while, and then it enjoyed this resurgence in the late 1800s, which was a time when everybody was very interested in forms of spiritualism. And I've read that there are a couple explanations for this. Like, one is people were really interested in seances and invisible forces where they could contact the dead, or invisible beings, because we had lost so many people in the Civil War. We were a nation of mourners. But also the telegram and the telephone had just been invented. So these previously non-existent forms of invisible communication are suddenly possible. So the imagination was primed to go, well, why couldn't mind control be a thing? Why not? Now I can pick up a phone and call someone in Dallas when I'm in Chicago. So people were starting to pick up mesmerism again, and they would hire mesmerists to do things like whisper them to sleep. It also makes me think of Reiki. The mesmerist would move his or her hands over the person's body and help them go to sleep. It was showing up in a lot of popular novels by Henry James, George du Maurier. And so everybody was thinking about mesmerism. So you would have been primed to believe that this mastermind criminal had mind control over all the people in his orbit. And people were even starting to use it as a criminal defense. I didn't know what I was doing. I was mesmerized. And some people successfully argued that and were acquitted.
And it's interesting too, because we still certainly have that meditation and all kinds of mind control and therapy and the power of positive thinking, and that kind of mind control and that sort of ability to figure out, to make yourself feel a certain way, and also to make someone else feel a certain way. We're open to that. And I think that's so fascinating what you were saying. You can now call Dallas from Chicago, as you say. Why should you need the phone for that? Why can't you just do it through your mind? So I love that. And it plays such a role in the story, because the three women who are the main characters of the story, and I want you to tell us about those in a minute. That's one of the things that the idea that one of them might be a mesmerist is such a powerful force in itself. The power of the rumor of how someone thinks, and the idea that sort of parallel to mesmerism is that the idea that a rumor is powerful, that just what you think is so powerful. Talk a little bit about that theme and how you used that.
I love that idea that the rumor has as much power as this idea that she's capable of mind control. She arrives at the Bethany home and all of the women around her start acting differently. And I almost saw it as, these were women who would have been granted very little power.
Mm.
The wages for jobs for women in factories and that sort of, seamstresses were so low at that time. They could barely afford rent. They were unwed mothers. There wasn't much an unwed mother could do. You couldn't even sue for child support in those days. They were very powerless. So this young woman arrives who the rumor spreads that she has this incredible invisible power, and all the women around her start to act differently and do things that are outside of their character or outside of the norm. And I guess I was seeing it as it's kind of an exploration of the idea of power, like powers, mystical powers, but also who holds the power to behave how they want to behave, to break the rules. And are we sometimes looking for that odd figure, that someone else on whom we can transfer, blame or responsibility, and then we can kind of do what we actually want.
I mean, it's so interesting because it is about the power of belief on so many levels, and the abuse of power, mm-hmm. and the power that women have if they work together to do something, as well as what happens or what can happen in a tightly structured society, as this was at the time, when someone decides to challenge that, for better or for worse, when someone decides to go outside the norm. So you have both ends of the spectrum of that. And let's start with the women, especially Abby. Talk a little bit about Abby. She's an extraordinary character, and I wonder where she came from.
Abby Swift Mendenhall was a real person. She was one of the founders of the Bethany home, one of the members of the Sisterhood of Bethany. She was the treasurer. So she spent a lot of time day to day in the Bethany home. She was somebody who was breaking boundaries, as you just mentioned, because traditionally, women who were fortunate enough to be on the high side of society would have ignored women who were pregnant out of wedlock. But she and some other women, decided to not only open this home for unwed mothers, but to be very visible about it, to fundraise, to lobby the city council and the mayor for support. And this is incredibly feminist, I think, for its time. They successfully convinced the city of Minneapolis to give them 2/3 of the fines that the city collected from madams and sex workers. So their funding was, they were taking what could have been a fundraiser for the city and giving it straight to the women who needed help. And they would say things publicly like, well, where are the men who made these women who they are? Abby, in my book, is based very closely on her journals. I was very fortunate to be able to read her complete correspondence and all of the journals she kept during her life. And before I set out to read the journals, I was picturing her. I mean, she was 63, so that's not old now, but I think it would have been considered elderly then. She's Quaker. She dressed all in black all the time. She seemed rather severe, but then in her journals, this personality emerged that was she had a lot of spark. She said things like, I wonder if God can tell when I'm being sarcastic, which I thought was just great. I mean, funny. And it showed she was mentally sharp. She did things like on her 37th birthday, she wrote, I turned 37 today and my life is very monotonous. I rarely leave the house. It was a lot of descriptions of domestic chores up until then. I rarely leave the house. Isn't this all that women are supposed to aspire to? And she meant marriage. Clearly she felt very trapped. And of course, she never left her marriage or anything like that. But you see, all of a sudden, like 10 years later, she joins the Sisterhood of Bethany, and she starts doing things like helping madams, like bailing madams out of jail, or bursting into the back doors of saloons to find women who needed her help. Like, she found her purpose. So from there, I wrote her as this woman who had found her purpose, and this is her life, this helping these women in the Bethany home.
You write her as being so smart. I love this sort of dichotomy of how she behaves one way to a certain group of people and another way to another group of people. Is that based on her diary, or is that from your own writer mind?
It's partly from my writer mind, but there were dichotomies that I noticed in the correspondence and the journal. So, for example, she was Quaker, and when she would write to friends, Quaker friends, she used the thee and thou, thy, the traditional plain speech. And then she could switch, she could code switch, and then write to her friend and be like, Mrs. Overlock, I really miss you. How was New Orleans? Like just more conversational. She was constantly questioning whether she was good enough, like a good enough Christian, and asking God to help her be better. She said at one point, I still feel like a bad child. She said that when she was like 50. I feel like a bad child. That stuff really.
It's so timeless, isn't it? It's so, she's so relatable throughout the book, and the way that she behaves one way to get someone to do something. She knows how to get something from a certain element of society, and she knows how to get something from another element of society, just trying to be the best person that she can be. I love everything she says. She's quite amazing. And into this Bethany home is also a character called May, who is also has many layers. Can you talk about her a little bit?
Oh yeah. So May is my most unreliable narrator. They're all a little unreliable, but especially May, because May got pregnant out of wedlock when she lived in Chicago. She lived in a really tight-knit Italian community. She had to leave. The boy wouldn't marry her. And from then on, May has convinced herself that what she needs to do is go back to that life and like hit the reset button. And it's not possible. She can't hit the reset button, especially in 1894. So she thinks what she needs is the right husband, and she's going to triumphantly return to Chicago, a respectable woman. And she lies to all the women around her, or she makes up stories about who she is and how she doesn't quite belong here the way everybody else does. But she's also telling herself a lot of untruths. And so writing through the layers of that was a challenge.
Yes.
But
because you know what was real for her, and you also know what she was trying to present to herself and the world. But you, as the author, knew what some of her secrets were.
Yeah, it's hard when you're writing close third person, which is what this book is told in, to have a character keeping secrets from the reader. So I had to I just have her want to avoid all of those thoughts about herself.
I mean, you did a great job. It's just, we're talking about The Mesmerist, you all. If you just joined us, we're talking about The Mesmerist by Caroline Woods. I always want to go like this with the cover. That's really great. It sort of moves.
It is mesmerizing.
You, into the book early on, walks the girl who becomes known as Faith in a absolutely terrifyingly powerful scene, which is so gorgeously written, the arrival of this girl. Why did you decide to have her arrive like that? And can you tell us a little bit about her?
Sure. So I think the original vision of the book that I had was this woman walks to the Bethany home. She has a really, really long walk. And why does she, everybody wants to know, why does she walk? Why does she have nobody with her? No one dropped her off. She won't say where she came from. She's been through something so bad that she doesn't want to talk about it.
And she's a mess. She's dirty and slovenly and mute and bruised and fragile and ethereal. You can't quite tell if she's completely gorgeous or grotesque. You really carefully skirt that question initially.
I think she was partly inspired by some of the women who went into the Bethany home. There, I read a heartbreaking story about one woman who went into the home, and most of them would assume a fake name while they were there to hide, like kind of hide behind. And the idea was, this is the name you're known as while you're here, and then you shed it when you leave. You go back, you get the fresh start that May was looking for, in a sense. So there was a real young woman who passed away while she was in the care of the Bethany home from tuberculosis. And she, on her deathbed, would not reveal what her name actually was. She wanted to be buried as, her name was Lily Hill, her name at the Bethany home, as Lily Hill. And I think in Abby's, it was either Abby's diary or another book that I read that said she was said to have come from a good family in Boston. But whatever had happened, she did not want to be affiliated with that name, even in death. And I found that so heartbreaking and chilling. And that was part of the inspiration for, like, this person without a past shows up. And then, of course, over the course of the book, we do learn Faith's past. It comes out.
And one of the things you've done so gorgeously in The Mesmerist is that you do a beautiful job of big picture of the time, what it was like to live in Minneapolis at the time. And you also do such a gorgeous job of making it be incredibly personal about each of the characters in the book. You take us on the tiniest of closest of levels and the biggest picture of levels as well. The research must have been so intense and so careful and so, I don't know, you must have filled your brain with it all. And then you have to decide what to use to make it feel so seamlessly authentic. Is there a process for that, or is it just by feel, or how do you do that?
I think I've gotten smarter about research than I used to be. I used to like cram myself full of books and books and books and books, anthologies, before I would start writing. And now I essentially like start that first scene as I'm doing the research and try to write and research at the same time. And whatever I'm writing about, I will do a deep dive about exactly that thing. Like, what did Main Street, Minneapolis look like in the 1890s, and what were the businesses there? You know, if I'm writing a scene set on Main Street. I read two very specific books about Minneapolis in the time, one called Minneapolis Madams, which goes into detail about the Bethany home and all the madams and sex workers, a book about the true crime. I read fiction that was written then. That's my like main go-to. So I reread Kate Chopin, The Awakening, because I was like, what did a feminist text look like in 1890? I think it was written like the year before 1890.
Even to the word choice and to the structure and to the attitude, all those kinds of things.
The attitude, the clothes, the food, the dialogue. Yeah.
I mean, in The Mesmerist, people are saying, I hope you get a chance to look at the comments later because they're great. And London sounds amazing. And Vicki Gregory says, love the cover. And Renee says, fascinating. And Lori Alcon Brown says, hello, love that cover. They're telling me to keep doing this to mesmerize. You will buy this book. You will buy this book. Forgive me. The little snippets of research, though, that come through so beautifully, even to what color of a gown of a certain class would never wear or would wear. When you find those little nuggets, how much fun is that?
It's so much fun. And I feel like the more specific, the better. Like the purple gown, I found the word heliotrope. I did not know that meant purple, but it does. That it was the color of the moment, 2 years earlier or something. And that was perfect. It was another one of those serendipitous moments because the dress was already purple. And then you read, heliotrope, was like the color of 1892. That's just so fun. I love that stuff.
It's just so reassuring. It's so reassuring that you're on the right track. I love what you're talking about. Let's go back to research for 2 seconds, because I think that's such a genius way of stepping yourself into the past. If you open the door of the brownstone that you know what it looks like inside because you've done the research, and now you're saying, what would the street look like What would, would there be cars or horses? What would it smell like? What would it sound like? Would there be street lights? Would it be day or night? And who would be out and who would not
Right.
be out?
Yeah.
And it's a way for you to immerse yourself in the time. How do you do that as a writer? Be then.
Oh, how do you be then? I think I've been fortunate to write about time periods in which photography existed.
Very.
I think about like medieval times or something, and I'm like, oh man, that you're relying on art that was not necessarily very true to life. I do look a lot at old photography. And you can find that, photographs of the streetcar. There's a lot of streetcars in the Mesmerist. What did it look like in Minneapolis? I spent a lot of time looking at like the maps. Where are the routes? I want to make sure I know where the stations were and everything, and what time it stopped running. That's a very important detail in the Mesmerist, the time that it stopped running. There are always a million things that come up like that. And sometimes you do have to just go online and search for it because you have a very specific question that's easier to find online.
And always when you look things up, you find one more thing that you would never have looked up.
I get distracted. I also went to the Hennepin Archives, the Hennepin Historical Archive in Minneapolis, and they had things like the original blueprints of the Bethany home that are on incredibly fragile paper. They're like crumbling, but I could see where the kitchen was downstairs, and I didn't know there was an infirmary until I read that. Oh, there's the infirmary. And I knew from those that they lived 2 to a room, which was nice. They didn't have to live in like a huge dormitory. A lot of interesting little.
When you are writing about this as fiction, and you're, sort of, oh, I'm an author and I'm writing historical fiction about this time, and you're talking about the Bethany home, and then you see the blueprints of the thing. And you realize that you, Caroline, are sort of this conduit between two times, between the real time and the fictional time, and with us, your readers. Does that feel like a responsibility, or, even scary or glorious?
It feels scary. I definitely looked at the ledgers and the blueprints. The ledgers are handwritten by maybe Abby Mendenhall. They're right there, but she's just recording like births and deaths and departures. And it's humbling because it's just a reminder, like, these were real people, and I am writing a book about them. And what would they have thought if this woman in 2024 was going to publish a book about them? You do really want to get it right, at least get the spirit of their existence right, because every detail, you're just not going to be 100% perfect, but I hope at least I captured like the spirit of what it was like to live in the Bethany home. And that's why I include different perspectives in the book. There are minor characters who complain about the Bethany home. Tuva is a minor character who, I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, goes back to her life at a brothel. And she's got her complaints, and she points out to Abby some of the limitations of the Bethany home. Because I didn't want to act like, oh, this place was sunshine and roses and they solved every one of society's problems, because that is one of the heartbreaking pieces of the story that Abby confronts is you can help individuals, but you can't always change the structures that exist that are putting people in this situation. So I wanted to have that come up in the book too.
And that's another thing that's so relatable about this novel, is that you could say that today. Women have the same problems, women have the same needs, women have the same constraints on their power, and the same, they're dismissed and belittled and harmed a lot of the time. And so many things really, so many things have changed, obviously, but so many things haven't changed. And it makes a book of historical fiction feel incredibly timely and so respectfully written, Caroline. It's so respectfully written of the people and the time. And you all can see that we have totally skirted the murder part in this.
Yeah.
It is the women solving some crimes in a way or not that I'm not going to say anything about. So we've talked about the characters, and we have both very elegantly tiptoed around the plot of the book. And when you read it, you will realize why. Caroline, you teach fiction. Which is such a I always wonder about that. I mean, I teach writing too, and I always wonder what can a creative writing teacher really give her students? What is it that you hope you can reveal to them or allow to have happen for them?
That's a great question. I think you approach each student differently.
Mm,
I sometimes don't know what to teach until I've read what they're writing. And then, we can all start talking about, I love the workshop format. And I think that oftentimes students, and I had this experience when I was in an MFA, students will point something out about each other's work, and they can be more insightful when it's the work of someone else than their own. And then they go back and go, oh, I can apply that to my own work too. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all just providing feedback to the writer about the experience of reading their work as an outsider. And I think that's often missing, for all of us where we write by ourselves, we get in our head, we get so focused on our book that we forget where we've been unclear. We don't realize that a scene is going slowly. We don't realize there's so much information up here. Like sometimes I don't realize that I haven't explained something. I think like the best thing about teaching is that you're helping writers find community, because community is just so necessary when a book or a short story or a poem is in its infancy period. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any like, this is what I teach, this is my specific tricks of the trade. I feel like it is about like, okay, you're handing in this book, here's how I experienced it as a writer. And students don't always like it, but
no, that's not why they're there for. I mean, of course, when we hand in a paper, we want the professor or teacher to say, "This is the best thing I've ever read." And you can't. I mean, but the better thing is, I love what you've done here. Let's talk about how to make it stronger and deeper and better. And what do you think about this? And I agree with you on the workshop and students reading other students' work, because you can see, oh, I don't have, my point of view is wrong, or there's no setting in this story, and then you
yeah.
think, oh, do I have it in mind? I admire you so deeply for teaching writing, because there are moments I'm sure you've had where you see someone get it. Like that look in their eyes that, oh, now I see what you mean.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's really rewarding. And I don't I always see it as an opportunity to help them tell the story that they want to tell in the best way possible. Like I don't try to, mold the genre that they're working on or anything like that. Like
I mean, it's funny. Oh my golly, I read an interview with Anne Sexton once, and this was the topic of it. What can you give your students? And her answer was amazing. She said, courage. I can give them courage.
oh, that's so
Yeah.
important.
And I think about that all the time. And I say that all the time. I think
Yeah,
that's,
she's a BU person.
oh, she is.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
She was.
She was, yeah, obviously. I'm seeing so many people more here are coming. Shannon is here, and Margaret is here, and Sue Street, and Renee, and Randy Trent. And Kathy says, I bet the blueprints were cool to see. London says, time travel via the pages. That is so true. We're going to get to your questions in a second, so I'm going to ask one more question. So this is the time to put your questions in the chat for Caroline, and then we'll get to that. I guess my last question today, we're talking about The Mesmerist, You All by Caroline Woods, which is just out for the past week and just getting absolute rave reviews. Let me tell you quickly, Allegra Goodman, this is one of my favorite blurbs of the book, says, it's a compelling story of murder, deception, unwed mothers, and the steadfast women dedicated to helping them. Beautifully rendered characters and excellent storytelling. And the PW Starred Review says, excellent, fastidious historic detail, expert suspense, and indelible characterizations combined to make this a certified page turner. And that is talking about The Mesmerist by Caroline Woods. How do you want us to feel when we close the last page and finish the book? What are you hoping for?
Oh, that's a good question. Satisfied.
Mhm.
I have a friend who, one of my beta readers read it, and this is going to be an unusual reference, but she said, I got that feeling at the end, as the ending was building, that you get at the end of a Tarantino movie when the revenge is coming. That satisfying revenge feeling. And I don't mean to make it sound like it's going to be very bloody, because it's not. But I loved that, like that crackling, satisfying, like, oh, here it comes build. I want people to feel very satisfied. And also, not to give away too much of how the ending goes, but I hope that people feel as if the endings I gave each of the three women fit them, that they feel earned.
Earned. I love that. Earned endings is really, really powerful. And I think the reason that you succeed so gorgeously at that in The Mesmerist is that the groundwork is laid throughout. So in the end, just like a Rubik's Cube, it just sort of clicks into place, and you have that anticipation of, oh my golly, I don't know what's going to happen, but I can feel it on the way. Sharon says, you stole my question, Hank. Sharon, you and me, we're mesmerizing together. We have a mind meld about questions here. Speaking of questions, you all, let's take a couple of questions from the audience. Shannon says, was this always the title? I love it.
No. And you know what? This book was called Ghost Mother for about a year. And a funny thing happened, that we found out another book called Ghost Mother was coming out like 3 weeks ago, a month before. So, and my initial reaction was panic and, frustration. And then I thought, well, maybe it should be called The Mesmerist. I mean, that is actually a simpler title. And it's so intriguing. Mesmerism is unusual. So I'm happy with it's like a fortunate, snafu. It was called Ghost Mother before.
I'm using that for a title, a fortunate snafu. I like it. I think it's right. I think The Mesmerist, I mean, Ghost Mother is haunting, obviously, but it's not as specific as The Mesmerist. I mean, you know what it's going to be about in The Mesmerist, for better or for worse. I think it's great. I think it's completely immersive sounding. Who else has a question? Not that it matters what I think. I'm just saying I like it. Renee says, had you ever been hypnotized?
I have not. But you know what? I've watched people be hypnotized. And there is a scene in the novel where May goes to a fancy dinner party where the entertainment is a mesmerist. And I based partly what happens in that scene on having seen people be hypnotized for entertainment when I was in college, which I was amazed by. Like I totally bought into it. I'm not sure how real or not it was, but no. So I haven't, but I have watched it happen, and it's really interesting.
It's really funny. Who was I even talking to about this? Somebody who does hypnosis or had been to one of some show where people were hypnotized, and the hypnotist was saying, it's not really hard to hypnotize someone. People were being skeptical, and they said, "Oh, come on, you could never hypnotize me." And he said, "Well, I probably could. Like, even if I just said to you right now, what sound does a cat make?" And the person says, "Meow." And he said, "See, I just did it. I made you act like a cat."
Meow.
So I'm very tangential, but I always think about that and and that's why we're so fascinated by it, because could it work? And maybe not, but then we've kind of seen it, and we do know how our minds are powerful and how we are capable of manipulation, and we are capable of being manipulated. That's gaslighting. That's mind games.
That's 100% real. We can be manipulated easily. Yes.
And Robin Stahl says, I've been hypnotized twice. Not sure it worked. Arf, arf. No, this whole thing is crashing now. This whole conversation is crashing. You're great, Robin. Thank you. One last question. Was it hard not to go off, says Diane Dick, hard not to go off in a million directions with this research?
I think it was easier not to get as distracted because my topic was so specific. The city of Minneapolis, the year 1894, the Bethany home, this one crime. I didn't go off in a million directions, but there were definitely rabbit hole moments. I get really into, I don't know why, I really get into looking at restaurant menus whenever I'm hungry most of the time. And like, I always look for like, what did they eat? What were the cocktails of the time? And then I can go like take an hour and look at all sorts of different, they're all online, pictures of restaurant menus from the 1890s. I probably spent too much time on that.
Another thing, just sort of parenthetically, my father, my biological father, was the music critic for the Chicago Daily News in the 50s.
Oh,
And
wow.
he wrote a book, a nonfiction book called What They Heard. And it was an analysis of about concerts in Boston in 1894 and what music was played at those concerts to sort of illustrate what people were hearing and what they were thinking and what popular music was. And what concerts people were attending at that time. And it's really revelatory. It's really quite interesting to look at the world through music as well.
That is really interesting because music changes our mood so much. It affects everything, how we dance, how we relax. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Cute little dad. Anyway, this has been completely great. We have gone way over time talking about The Mesmerist, but we have just been so riveted by this. Congratulations on this completely fabulous book. Shall we spin the wheel of fun and see who wins a copy of The Mesmerist? Okay, don't get hypnotized by the spinning wheel. You must be so tired of these hypnotist jokes. I'm
not. Oh, you can tell them all day.
And the winner is Catherine Hollum. Oh, that's marvelous, Catherine. So happy to see that. You are such a veteran of Crime Time, and we love that you have won the Mesmerist. So you're going to get an email telling you where to write to me, that I will write to our executive producer, who will write to Caroline's publicist, and then you'll get your book. And that is how this works. Caroline, stick around for one tiny second while I tell you that next week at 3 p.m., special time, 3 p.m. ET, because Robert Harris is in the UK, we will speak to Robert Harris about his book Precipice, which is aptly named. It takes place in London in 1914, just before the Great War. And it is about deception and intrigue and who knows what will happen next. It's sort of a passionate love story as well as the preparation for war. No, on the inside it says, a spellbinding novel of passion, intrigue, and betrayal, set in England in the months leading up to the Great War. So next week at 3 p.m. ET, to give Robert Harris a little bit of time to get some sleep, Precipice by Robert Harris. And today we have talked about The Mesmerist by Caroline Woods. Thank you, Caroline, for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much, Hank. You are amazing. This was so great.
My goodness, I had fun. What a joy to read this marvelous book. And you all run, click, and get The Mesmerist by Caroline Woods. And we will see you. Yay. And we will, all the way from Chicago, we will see you next time right here at 4 p.m. ET, no 3, next week, special time, 3 p.m. ET here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. And until then, remember, it is always safe inside a book. And we will see you next time.